What's up guys, welcome back to Programming Tutorials. In the first episode we covered installing Visual Studio 2017 and creating a very basic first application. Now the application we created changed the value of a text box, and I left it with a little bit of a teaser of how a user can interact with your application by adding various events. So if I move my mouse into the button here, you can see that the text is changed to my mouse entered the text box area, and when I leave it changed it to my mouse left the text box area. So the way that we did that was very simply on the events tab over here, which is the little lightning bolt. If we scroll down, some of the events are mouse enter and mouse leave. All I've done to add a new event to that is double clicked on the empty space here, and you can see that brings up an area where you can enter some code, and whatever code that you've entered will be executed when that occurs. So you can see mouse enter says my mouse has entered the text box area, and the same with mouse leave. So very basic stuff, but it was just there to encourage you to go and explore Visual Studio and the different events that you can add to the program. So I'm going to get rid of that code now. So I'm going to click on my button, make sure I'm on the events tab, go down to here and delete that out of the click, delete that out of mouse enter, and the same with mouse leave. Now you can see if I go over to a code tab here, it hasn't removed the code that we've written, that remains behind. So you can keep that there if you want to. I'm going to delete it for cleanliness, but it will not perform any actions at the moment because we don't have the events linked with it. So let's go and delete that. Now what we're going to do in this tutorial is cover variables and basic if statements. So I like to think of variables as boxes that you can store data and values in. Then you can give those boxes names so that you can refer to them later on in your code, but that's the most simplest way to think of those. And if statements are basically checking the value of something. We'll come to that a little bit later. So let's go ahead and create our basic calculator app. First thing we're going to do is we're going to reuse this button here. I'm going to switch over to the Properties tab. I'm going to go down here and change the text to Calculate. And I'm going to change the name of it to BTN Calculate. Okay, so now we've got our calculate button. I'm also going to reuse this text box here. I'm going to change this to txt no1. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. And I'm going to copy that just by hitting Control C and paste it with Control V. And I'm going to change this one to txt no2. Just going to move my calculate button in between them there. And I need to add a third text box. This time I'm not going to copy and paste it. I'm just going to type text in my toolbox over here. Drag a text box on. And I'm going to make it wider. And you can see as I make it wider, Visual Studio gives you nice helpful lines there so you can line it up with various controls. So this is going to be called txt result. I'm going to make the application a little bit smaller just so it looks a little bit neater. Okay, so the final control I'm going to add on there is a label. So again, I'm going over to my toolbox, just going to type in label, and we get that there. I'm going to leave the name of it for the moment, and I'm just going to change the text to plus, and I'm going to move that in between the two text boxes. And you can use your arrow keys on your keyboard to move it to wherever you need if you need the fine adjustments. So let's go back into our calculate button. I'm going to double click on it so we get the code. And you can see what's important to note here is it's changed our old code here that used to be txt my result to txt no1. So Visual Studio is intelligent enough to update your code when you change the name of a control. It's very useful. Some languages don't do that, and you have to go back and change them yourself manually. So the first thing we're going to do is create two variables to store some numbers in. So our numbers are going to be integers. So if we write int and then space, and I'm going to call it no1, and I'm going to do the same with no2. So they've got green lines at the moment because they're not used in any way. What I'm going to do is set those to a particular value. So I want no1 to be equal to whatever we type into this box here, which is txt no1. So I'm going to say no1 equals txt no1 dot text. And as always, put a semicolon at the end of the code. So you can see we've got a red underline there. Now if we hover over that, it's going to tell us what the problem is. And it's saying it cannot implicitly convert type string to int. What that means is the value that we store in here is a string, and we've declared an integer, which is a number. Visual Studio and C# cannot implicitly perform that conversion for us. Luckily, C# has a convert function in, so I'm going to type convert dot, and as I put dot, you can see all the possible conversions that you can do. So you can convert something to a string, you can convert it to an int, and there are various other conversions that you want to do. I'm going to do convert to int, and you can see it says 32. The difference between, if I go back, the difference between int 16, 32 and 64 is just the size of the number that you can store in there. For most cases, int 32 will be absolutely fine. So if I open the bracket, you can see here that this method is actually expecting a Boolean value, but it also says 1 of 19. If I press the down arrow, see, it can also accept a byte, a char, date time. It can accept lots of different values there. And if we go down, number 13 is a string value that it can take. That's what we're going to be using. So we're going to complete that line of code like that, and you can see that our red underline has gone, so it's now happy that no1 is going to have that stored in it. I'm going to do the same thing. All I'm going to do is copy and paste the code because we're reusing much of the same. I'm going to change it to no2 and txt no2. So I'm going to go ahead and press F9, which adds a breakpoint. You could do the same thing by clicking the left hand side of the code window there. I'm going to run our code. Once the application is launched, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a value 10 in here and the value 5 in there and press calculate. Now you can see it's brought us down here. It's highlighted that line in yellow, so that's the line of code it's about to execute. If I hover over the text property of txt01, I can see it's 10. The important thing to note is it has double quotes around it. That means it is a text value at the moment, but that shouldn't be a problem because we're doing our conversion here. If I hover over no1, it has a value of 0 at the moment, so we haven't set it to anything. If I press F10, which will perform that line of code, if I go back and hover over no1, you can see it's now set to a value of 10. So we're going to do the same thing with the second one. It's currently 0. We're expecting it to convert 5 to an integer and store it there. And we have that. So if I hover over no1, we've got 10, no2, we have 5. So now that we've got those values stored in our boxes or in our variables, what we need to do is set the value of our text box here to both of those added together. So I'm going to stop the application up here. And we're going to write a line of code that says txt result, which is the name of our text box here. So it's called txt result. I'm going to say dot text equals, and we're going to say no1 plus no2, and we'll put a semicolon to finish our line of code. Now again, we've got that red underline here, so we hover over it and it's saying the same things we had before, just switched around. It cannot implicitly convert an integer or an int to a string. So we can perform the same conversion here, and we can say convert.toString, open bracket, go in there and close the bracket, and that will convert that value to a string here. I'm going to start the program and we're going to check that that works. So I'll put 10 and 5 in the boxes, so we would expect this to be set to 15. Let's press calculate, and it is. So that appears to be working, which is good. So if I change this to 10 and press calculate, it's going to make that 20. Excellent. So another way of doing this is to create a variable or another box to store your result in. So I'm going to say int result, and I'm going to say result is equal to no1 plus no2. Now we don't have to do the conversion here because we've got an int result and we're trying to store an int in it, which is no1 plus no2. That means we can go down here and say our txt result.text equals txt dot result equals result. Put semicolon. Now we've got the same problem here. It's saying it can't convert it. So there are two ways you can do it. We can use the method that we used before, which is convert to string, or we can use another method which is a toString method. So I'll put result and put dot, and you can see it's coming up with toString. Now both methods work in very similar ways, and it will be your preference which one you like to use. I prefer to use toString whenever I'm going to a string, and I use conversions whenever I'm trying to change it to an integer or a date or something like that. That's just my preference. You might have a completely different way of doing it, and both ways are absolutely fine. So just to prove that we haven't changed the functionality of the program, we'll go back, we'll run it, and we'll check the results. So value 10, value 3, calculate, we get 13, so we're doing the same thing. So that's a very basic principle of how to use variables and how you can use them to perform calculations. One thing I'm going to go back and do here is add some comments to the code. Comments can be used with 2 forward slashes, and you'll see whatever I type after the 2 forward slashes is in green. That means that code is not going to be executed. So I'm going to say declare variables to store numbers in, and down here I'm going to say set variables to text box values whilst performing, if I could spell, whilst performing integer conversion. Down here I'm going to add a comment to say declare variable to store the result in, and here I'm going to say perform addition and store result in variable. Finally, I'm going to add the comment that says set the value of txt result to the calculation we performed. I cannot stress the importance of comments. If you do not add comments, you will look back on code that you wrote a week ago, several months ago, and you will not have a clue what you wrote or why you wrote it. I've done that so many times when I've not commented code, so it's very important that you get into that habit. Okay, so we've got our calculator app. It works, it does very basic addition. What if we wanted to divide, or what if we wanted to multiply something? I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm going to add a few more buttons to the screen, so I'm just going to add one here. I'm going to set the value of, so the text value of it to plus. I'm going to come up to the name of it and call it btn plus, and I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller, and then what I'm going to do is copy and paste it once, copy and paste it again, and a fourth time. So I'm just going to quickly go through and change these to btn minus and make sure the text value of it is minus. I'm going to do the same thing with this, make sure the text value is x, which is multiplying, so we say btn multiply, and finally divide, so btn divide. Now divide is shown by a forward slash on there. Just going to centralize them a little bit. Okay, so we've got our buttons here. Now what I want to do with these buttons is to change this plus sign up here. So this plus sign is currently label 1. I'm going to change it to LBL operator. And I'm going to go into each of these buttons and add the code to change that. So I will double click on the plus button, which adds a default click event. And I'm going to say LBL operator.text equals plus. Now I'm going to do the same with the others, and I'll join you again in just a second. Okay, so we've got all of the code for our buttons here. Let's run the application and check that it's working correctly. So you can see if I hit the minus button, that changes it, times button, divide, and the plus button. So they're all working correctly as we expect. So let's change it to minus, and let's write 10 minus 5 and hit calculate. And you can see it hasn't minused it at all. It's still doing our plus operation, and that's because we've changed the visual representation on the screen, but we haven't changed the code behind. So let's go and do that now. Let's stop the application. And the way that we're going to do this is we're going to write some very simple if statements. So we've got our logic here that says perform the addition. What I want to do is surround this by an if statement and say if open bracket. Now the open bracket means that your logic that you're testing will go between here. So I want to check that LBL operator.text equals plus. And if it does, I want to execute some code. So I'm going to put a squiggly bracket. Not sure what the proper term for that is. I call them squiggly brackets. I'm going to delete the end one, go to the bottom of here, and put a close squiggly bracket. Now you can see what it's going to do. If that logic check is successful, it will perform this line of code here. Now you can see we've got some red underlining here. This is because we're saying equals plus. This believes, as we see here, that if you use text equals something, it's trying to set that value. So when performing an if statement, the way to say equals is with two equal signs. So what we can see here is we're saying LBL operator.text equals plus, and if that's true, it will perform this line of code. Now you can see that we've still got a red underline here. Now if we hover over that, it's saying it's a use of an unassigned local variable result. What this means is if this code is not successful, we've got this variable here that we're trying to set the text value to, but it doesn't have a value. So I'm going to go up here and say equals 0, and what that will do is that will give me a default value of 0, and then it will say if this condition is true, it will perform the addition. If it's not true, it will just set that to 0. Let's go and check that out. And what I'm going to do is, as we do this, I'm going to put a breakpoint in with the F9 key on that line, and I'm going to step line by line through the code and confirm it's doing what I expect it to. So I'm going to put 10 and 20. So at the moment it's set to plus 10 plus 20. Let's hit calculate. See the first two lines of code, I'm just going to quickly F10 through them and confirm they've executed. So number 1 variable is set to 10, number 2 is set to 20. That's what I expect. It declares our result variable, which is currently set to 0. Now it's going to perform this if statement. So it's an LBL operator.text, which we can preview here, is equal to plus, and it's going to perform that logic here. If it's successful, which we will check now, and press F10, it will move down into this line of code here. And you can see now it's going to perform the addition. So it's going to set result to no 1 plus no 2. Press F10 again, and we can see that that has happened. It has set that value. Press F10, and the final thing it's going to do is set the text value to that. So let's press F10, and if we hover over it, we can see it's set to 30. I'm going to press continue up here. It will load our application. It will confirm that that's correct. So let's set it to minus. So we've now got 10 minus 20. Press calculate, and if we F10 through those, we can see it set to 10, and we can see it set to 20. Our result is declared and set to 0. This time our LBL operator.text that we preview it does equal minus, so it should not execute this line of code here. Let's press F10 and confirm that that's correct. And you can see it's completely skipped that line of code here, or that section of code here, and it's going straight down to setting this value to our result, which is 0 at the moment, because that was our default value when we declared it. So let's press continue, confirm that that happens. And it did, so our value is 0, so we know that our code is operating successfully. So in order to perform our other operations, there are faster ways of doing this, but at the basic level I recommend you start off with if statements and you work your way up. So all I'm going to do is copy this code here, press return twice, paste, press return twice, and do it so that you've got 4. Now very simply I'm going to change that to a minus, and if that's the case I'm going to do result equals no 1 minus no 2. And I'm going to change the comment here to say minus. I'm going to do the same thing with multiply. Now multiply in programming is an asterisk or a star. So if I was to do no 1 x no 2, it doesn't know what to do. You can see here it has no idea what the code to execute is. So to multiply in programming it is an asterisk. I'm going to change the comments to say multiply, perform multiplication and store result. And down here finally we're going to do the divide. and a divide is a /. So okay, so perform division on the code. So now no matter what we've got in here that we're setting from our buttons down here, whether it's going to be a plus, a minus, an X or a /, it's going to perform the correct calculation here, and it's going to store the result in our txt result.txt. Let's start the program again and just confirm that that's correct. So we have 10 plus 10, calculate is 20. We'll say 20 minus 10 should equal 10. It does. We will say 10 times 10 equals 100, but it does. And finally we'll do 100 divided by 10 equals 10. There we go. We have our basic calculator application working. It is very simple. It might look like there is a lot of lines of code. So there's something that we can do to tidy that up here. In C# it's referred to as region. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to press the hash key or the pound sign, type the word region, and I'm going to say perform operator button code. And then down here at the bottom I'm going to put hash end region. Now what that enables me to do is it gives me a collapsible region of code here, so it simplifies what I'm looking at. I will probably never have to change this code again, so I don't want to look at it. I want to collapse that up, get rid of it and ignore it. I'm going to do the same with my if statements here, so I'm going to put hash region, perform operator logic, and I'm going to go to the bottom and put hash end region. And what that enables me to do, if I collapse that up, is it means I can get rid of that. So I know that it's performing operator logic in here. If I need to go into that, I can always expand it out and go and change it. But for the purposes of viewing, I think it looks a lot cleaner and nicer if you put stuff in regions there. So that's it for today's tutorial. Thanks for watching, guys. I will see you next time.